Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
mostly, regulatory and, prudent investor laws and things that we're bumping up against there. So why that matters is, Commerce looked at it and said, there's still a need in the market for early stage risk capital to develop businesses here. And so we want to fill that gap. Well, we're a really small team at Commerce. And for us, any FTE that we get, we have to get from the legislature. We said, we don't have the staff to effectively administer essentially a $60 million early stage venture capital fund. We need to find an asset manager. So we carved out $13 million of the 58 for an angel match program. Again, these are all federal dollars. These are no North Dakota state taxpayer dollars. These aren't legacy fund dollars. Federal dollars, we took $13 million for an angel match program, and $45 million, we said we're going to take that out for an RFP for an asset manager. Well, we got a few responses, but the federal guidelines on how fees had to be paid, not getting any, carry from the fund till the fund was closed 10 years from now, just a really unconventional fee structure made it difficult to find someone that was willing to take it on and also had the expertise to do it. So that's
Josh, and I'm sorry to interrupt you like that, but let me ask you real quick for folks' context. When you're talking about that $58 million, that's a one-time shot of money from the federal government, right? And once it's spent, or is there a renewal?
So that's correct. So I say it's one time, they did it in 2008. They did it again now. It's kind of a program that they rekindle when there's a broad financial crisis. So there may be SSBCI dollars that, come to us again a decade from now, but there's not a continuing appropriation or anything like that.
And when does that money have to be spent by? Is there a fire under you to spend it at a certain time? And if not, you have to return it? How does that work?
Yeah, so there is a time frame that it needs to be spent. I believe it is 6 years.
Okay.
And then it's invested in businesses. So the thought is these dollars come back with returns.
Yes.
At the time in which they revolve back to us, they lose all of their federal strings. So those become state dollars, once they've revolved back.
So the goal would be to keep them in perpetuity with the federal government starting you out of the 58, and then in theory, keeping it somewhere near that $60-ish million fund under the Department of Commerce.
That is the intent, yes. So within the North Dakota Development Fund in the Department of Commerce. So the Development Fund separately has its own portfolio of loans, equity investments, convertible notes that it does as standard course of business. This is kind of a public-private partnership where we've said we want to bring in a private asset manager, and then those dollars will revolve back to the development fund, 10 years from now when the fund life is over, and then we can use those dollars again for whatever the best and, highest use is. So the hope would be we get some big wins, and, that 45 million becomes, 100 million, 200 million. And now all of a sudden we have this really innovative war chest of dollars to keep developing new innovative businesses in the state.
How did it, so how did Mr. Leary, and obviously he's something of a celebrity. He's on Shark Tank. He's all those things, but he has a firm, O'Leary Ventures, and essentially they have a contract with the state where they get to charge a fee basically for directing the investment of those funds. Is that how that works?
That's correct. Yep. So it's an asset management agreement. So there is a management fee, and then there is, a participation in the upside, which, if a company exits, they get a percentage, and, the state gets a percentage. And it's very kind of standard and in line with terms that you'd see in a, private sector asset management agreement.
Is there anything that's unique about this? Because a lot of people are focusing in on the fact that the person, Kevin O'Leary is something of a celebrity. So a lot of people are focusing in on that. This contract, is it any different than other sorts of assets? Because we have these sorts of, obviously our legacy fund is invested, our pensions are invested. The state deals with money managers all the time, or asset managers, whatever you want to call them. Is there anything different, substantially different between this contract and those? Nothing
substantially different. A standard contract is usually 2 and 20. 2% management fee, 20% of the carry, sometimes 3 and 30 for, depends on the asset manager, but it also depends on the asset. For an asset with a lot of strings attached to it, a lot of compliance, both state and federal compliance, it depends. So the contract, while individually negotiated, is materially consistent with any other asset management agreement the state would enter into. Or, if you're a high net worth individual and you want to start a venture fund and hire an asset manager, it's very similar to a contract like that.
Josh, how much, which do all 50 states have a version of this fund from the federal government? And if so, what percentages have an asset manager hired, or is that a requirement of the federal government to receive these federal funds?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not a requirement. And so there was a couple of different programs that Treasury allowed you to deploy the funds through. So one was Angel Match, which is the one that we're administering with the $13 million with Commerce. So these aren't things that we just pulled out of thin air and said, we want to do this. Treasury says, here are your 5 options to pick from. You decide, what makes sense for your state, but here are your boundaries. So we picked Angel Match and Direct Investment Program. The Direct Investment Program is where we hired O'Leary Ventures to manage on our behalf. And so every state has SSBCI dollars. How they are implementing and managing them is really state by state. In some cases, it's even not the state that applied for the dollars. It could be, a 501c3. So in 2008, I can't remember if it was the Lewis and Clark Development Fund or the Lake Agassiz Development Fund. They were the ones that got the SSBCI dollars in 2008. So it wasn't even state government that got it. I don't know why we didn't apply then, but it
is what it is in the past. But I want to know then, you said you're differentiating where these funds going about, I think you said 13 million angel funds. What's the dollar amount roughly that Kevin O'Leary or his investment firm will be overseeing as an asset manager for the state of North Dakota?
45 million.
45 million. Got it. And I think it's good for our listeners to know how to define. He will personally be overseeing it, or his investment firm will be, and he just happens to be the public face of that investment firm?
Yes, great question. So it's his firm. So O'Leary Ventures, Kevin's hired a CEO, Paul Palangin, who ran I believe the fund is now 13 billion previously. And then they have a staff, and Kevin is just the chair of the board and the public face. But ultimately, they also answer to the North Dakota Development Fund Board of Directors as well. That's the development fund is their client that they're working on behalf of. So it's a firm that we've hired, not an individual.
Who was? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask. I think one of the things that came out in the Bismarck Tribune, Jack Durr's reporting in the Bismarck Tribune, was that there was just the O'Leary Ventures was the only company that responded to the state's RFP. For people who don't know, that's a request for proposal. If the state has a need for something, a service or a product or something, they put out what's called a request for proposal, and there's all sorts of things. People bid on it. I could provide it for this. I could provide it for this, and then it's a selection process. It's intended to protect, ensure that the state's getting the best bang for its buck, protect against things like corruption and stuff. O'Leary Ventures was the only fund that applied for and got this, and I think some people are scratching their heads about that. Why? Why were they the only ones to respond?
Yeah, so that's partially true. So the RFP was actually issued 3 different times.
Okay.
So in the third issuance, O'Leary Ventures was the only respondent. In the first 2, we had other respondents. And so, Rob, you allude to, state procurement law says, I can't just go out and be like, hey, I'm going to hire Rob Port to go do, media for me. It has to go through a really rigorous process for procurement. And so that RFP process that we did for this, was the same with any other, service or product that we'd procure as a state. The first two RFPs did have responses. They just didn't meet criteria.
Can you tell us how many?
I believe there was 3 in the first and 1 or 2 in the second.
Are you at liberty? Go ahead.
Oh, I just don't remember the exact numbers, but it was roughly, I think, between 3 and 5 across those first 2 RFPs.
Are you at liberty to say whom, or would it be names we would recognize, or those in the finance world would recognize off the top of their heads?
I'm not sure that I can disclose that. Okay. I would probably have to check. There are names that I think some people would recognize, others may not, just depending on how familiar they are with the. You probably have to be,
you know your way around CNBC or the finance world a little bit. That's how most of these things work. But Joshua, who is it that makes the final selection? Does that go directly to you? Is the governor involved? Is there a board that makes the final selection?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that's all spelled out in the RFP process. So there's when the RFP is issued, there is stated, who is the reviewer of those applications. And so I was not part of the review committee. I said, I want to make sure optically and everything that doesn't look like I'm trying to steer something one way or another.
That makes sense.
It was the head of investments for Commerce who oversees kind of the LIFT program, the North Dakota Development Fund, and then a development fund staff member. I believe there was one other member of that review committee. So that was all kind of spelled out up front in the RFP process.
Let's talk about, Mr. Lee, obviously, again, celebrity, well-known. Fair to say, I think sometimes a little bit of a controversial. He has a narrative where he's talked about no-go states and I don't know what the other one, go-to states, go-to and no-go. I think those are what he's been saying.
If not something extremely similar to that.
Yeah. So he's been out there saying, he's talked about Massachusetts, right? And he doesn't like the laws of Massachusetts. So he's talking about bringing it out, and he's talked about how much he loves North Dakota because we have low taxes, we have a lot of policies that he says are friendly for business. And so during an interview, actually with my colleague Thomas Evanella on another one of our podcast network podcasts, he was talking about why North Dakota versus Minnesota. And, he called Minnesota a no-go state, and he said this. He said, what's the difference? Talking about Fargo and Moorhead. He said, one thing, policy. They, referring to Moorhead, have a no-go policy. They have unstable policy. They have unstable everything, unstable energy policy. People aren't stupid. They just moved across the river to here, and you have a thriving city. Their town looks like Cuba. Not my fault, their fault. If they don't get their act together, it'll just keep getting worse. Now, I'm reading, this is from the Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, the CEO of that, Shannon Full. She said, it's an unfortunate choice of words, in our opinion. We know that there are tremendous assets to this region on both sides of the Red River. So what did you make about this very high-profile person that you brought into North Dakota, sort of creating this controversy between Fargo and Moorhead? Did you find those comments to be helpful?
So I think the comments are less about Fargo and Moorhead and more about North Dakota and Minnesota. And so I think that's an illustration, that was used in terms of, Kevin talks in a lot of interviews. He says, I'm not into politics, I'm into policy. There's good policy and there's bad policy. And I think, how you define what's good and bad varies person to person. But primarily, there is business-friendly policy and unfriendly business policy. And I think it's not localized to maybe a North Dakota and Minnesota conversation, but if you look at the mass exodus of companies from California to, say, Texas, or companies from New York and Massachusetts to Florida, I think it's a macroeconomic trend. And I think, Kevin's comments, kind of around the comparison of Fargo and Moorhead that says, there's very comparable, cities here going back 25 years ago in terms of population. So if you're just measuring, where do people want to live and, where do they want to start businesses and things like that, there's clearly a very stark difference in terms of population between Fargo and Moorhead today. What's the primary differentiator there? Well, a lot of it's probably taxes. Personal income tax and business taxes are vastly different. So I think it's less about Fargo and Moorhead, more about North Dakota, Minnesota, or, a broad swath of business-friendly states, unfriendly business states. And we all know that the residents in Moorhead aren't necessarily driving the policy and tax decisions in Minnesota. That's happening in St. Paul. More just of an illustration to show, given a free market economic system, capital flows to the path of least resistance. And it just happened to be the, illustration that was used in that case. We, as
Josh,
North Dakota, collaborate.
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration there too, and I'm sorry to interrupt there, Josh, but let me kind of lay out I'm sure you heard of the instance of it's not the exact equivalent, but back before Shanaful's predecessor at the Fargo Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, Craig Whitney, had to clash a little bit with Eric Spencer's predecessor at the statewide North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, because at the time they were taking member dollars and putting up billboards that were kind of openly antagonistic towards Minnesota, specifically regarding their policy. And Craig, understandably, had a lot of pushback for that, given that he had dues-paying members who owned businesses in the Moorhead-Dilworth community there. Some of the things that Shannon Full mentioned was the collaboration between municipal, county, and state legislative leaders on flood protection to ensure property values for the whole region. There's the Tri-College Association that allows students to go back forth in between MSU and Concordia and NDSU whilst completing their degrees, working on workforce issues here in town. There's a workforce academy at Moorhead High.
Grand Farm.
Kevin O'Leary, unfortunately, I hear what you were saying, but that was not, it wasn't what Kevin directly said. For whatever reason, he decided to directly speak to the city of Moorhead. And I'll cop to a personal bias here. I've never lived in Moorhead my entire life. I did my undergrad over at MSUM, but if you look on 8th Street or 40th Avenue South at the Hornbachers, the very nice new grocery store they have down there in the southern developments in town, you look at southern West Fargo with Eagle Run or some of the areas we're expanding in South Fargo near the Davies neighborhood, they don't look that different from each other. And frankly, saying that one of them looks like Cuba versus the other one's just kind of an inherently stupid comment.
Just to piggyback on what Ben's saying, I think there's a point to be made when you look at Grand Forks versus East Grand Forks, Wahpeton versus Breckenridge, Fargo versus Moorhead. One side of the river has a lot more population than the other, and I think it's right to say that maybe has a lot to do with things like taxes. I guess, Josh, the problem, the thing that kind of gave me pause was calling Moorhead Cuba. I thought that was kind of unfair.
It doesn't, they don't look the same. And I'm wondering if you've had conversations with him, given the fallout there with local leaders like Shannon Full about that and about how he's going to kind of conduct his public image here when servicing a state like North Dakota, even though it's federal dollars that you're administering through the state.
Yeah, so in the short answer, I haven't talked to Kevin since that, but, we do visit often. And I think, too, it's locally, there's a ton of collaboration, and our, chamber, the Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo chamber represents both sides of the river. There's obviously a lot of, dialogue and collaboration that takes place there. I think it's more of a Bismarck and St. Paul conversation with the two capitals. And, to Rob's point about there's some empirical data that shows, a less populous state has a lot higher population in, essentially the same community just on the other side of the river, the primary difference being taxes and policy. So I think that's the illustration that was, being made. It wasn't to say Moorhead's a terrible place. It was to say, there are capital flows to the path of least resistance, and policy matters in that conversation. And there's data points that we can refer to that, underscore that narrative. And I think it was less to do with the city of Moorhead itself and the great people that live there and all of that, and more a broader policy discussion around there's always going to be a competition amongst states. Right now, I would say that, yeah, and I think it's good. It drives everybody to, try to do better for their citizens and their businesses. And so to, the Eric Spencer and Craig Whitney, conversation, Eric represents North Dakota, and the borders around North Dakota are kind of where that, starts and stops, versus the Fargo Moorhead West Fargo Chamber has to straddle both sides of that equation. So there's inherently going to be a tension that arises there when there's competing interests. And so in the environment we're in today, where states are competing for workforce, North Dakota is not the only one that's looking for workforce. When we're competing for, capital investment and workforce, I think this tension amongst states, in this competition amongst states, is going to be a narrative that continues as, legislators and lawmakers have to look at how do we win in this competition amongst states for capital and talent.
I want to be really clear real quick, Rob, that it was not Eric Spencer that did that. That was his predecessor. And I just don't want Eric calling me up and saying, hey, that's not true, because it's not. And I like Eric. He's been a lot less antagonistic than his predecessor. Go ahead, and I have a follow-up.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, first of all, I like the idea of bringing somebody like Mr. O'Leary in. I think one thing that our listeners should really understand is just how much of a long-standing challenge it has been to bring capital into North Dakota and to get investment into North Dakota. Our economy, I love agriculture and I love energy, but our economy is not diverse in our state, and that leaves us very vulnerable to swings in crop prices, swings in oil prices. And we have struggled with this, frankly, since statehood. One of the reasons we created the state-owned Bank of North Dakota was to try to control, capital and give ourselves a better deal to bring capital to North Dakota. We have struggled with this forever. So I like the idea of getting, I don't know, crazy is the wrong word, getting outside of the box a little bit in trying to bring some of this stuff in. I like it. I think it's good. Let's be provocative. Let's get out there. And the thing I don't want to jeopardize this is maybe Mr. O'Leary talking and creating controversy where we don't need controversy. I guess that's the
frankly,
point.
Someone of his caliber should know that. Well, no, I would say he does know. He's trying to create a headline. He's trying to get us to do what we're doing today. It gives him name recognition. I wonder how much it helps the portfolio.
Well, and Rob, I think to underscore kind of what you said, I think coming back, the Department of Commerce exists. Our mission statement is to attract and retain wealth in the state. And 70% of our economy is oil and soil. And those are commodity markets where North Dakota is the most reliant state in the nation on exports. And so our economy is essentially at the mercy of commodity prices for crops and oil and gas. If those things are down, our economy is 70% of our economy is down, and probably more when you factor in the ancillary industries. When it's good, it's really good. Coming, into this role, I was a private sector before, never thought I'd be in government. I was an entrepreneur. I never had a boss. And I was like, state government, there's no way I'd be interested in that. But I think the scale at which we can influence things in state government is what makes it exciting. Where I'm going with this is, one of the things that I wanted to do is say, let's bring downstream value-added processing to our two core industries in the state of energy and ag, where now, rather than exporting products at commodity prices minus transportation costs, which we're not near, a lot of transportation hubs, let's process those in the state and export finished goods where we realize the economic impact of that processing. Well, in order for that to happen, and in order to continue to foster new businesses and innovation and things like that, we need access to capital. And it's been incredibly different because we're sandwiched between some difficult narratives. One, we have ESG in Wall Street saying we don't want to touch anything that has to do with fossil fuels. And we're over here in North Dakota saying, hey, fossil fuels are fossil fuels still bad if we decarbonize them? Are fossil fuels bad, or is CO2 bad? Because if CO2 is bad, we can solve for that. And the political narrative has been, no, fossil fuels are bad. Doesn't matter if you capture the CO2. So capital is difficult to come by from Wall Street because of that narrative. Well, then you go internationally. Well, as we saw with the Fufeng project and all of the, bills in the legislature now, the state has said, well, hold on, we're not so sure we want international capital financing deals in the state. So, okay, where do we go from there is if we, need to build out downstream industries, we can't go to Wall Street and we can't go internationally. We've got to get creative. And I think we've come up with a really creative solution. And the other thing North Dakota's not good at, maybe what we're worst at, is telling our story. We're inherently this Midwest, extremely humble, below the radar, put our boots on, go to work state, which is awesome. But in competing for workforce and competing for capital attraction, sometimes you have to go out and tell your story and make some headlines. And so we've seen.
So to that point, do you think open antagonism would help that then, to tell that story that's getting away from North Dakota when speaking about other states?
That's not what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, we're looking to attract and retain wealth in the state through attraction of capital and talent. And we're looking at creative ways to do that. No, we don't want to make enemies in the process, but at the same time, having someone with a platform to help talk about the great things that North Dakota has to offer, I think has more positives than it does negatives. We don't get to control every word of the narrative, but I think that's okay when you look at, the potential upside.
Speaking of narrative or narrative control, I did want to ask you, as the hirees, if that's the correct term, of that investment firm, do you get to set categories of investment that you'd like to see preferred, or are those entirely in the hands of the investment firm itself?
So we have the ability to do that. We haven't necessarily put those prescriptions in place. We've said we want the best deals to float to the top. We want free market economics to win. And we want, an independent kind of review to say, these are the winners that, we're going to back. Now, there's tons of dialogue between the O'Leary Ventures staff and the North Dakota Development Fund staff and the broader, state of North Dakota staff to say, hey, have you thought about this deal? Have you talked to this person? That dialogue's happening, but we haven't gone to them and said, 30% of your portfolio needs to be ag tech, 30% needs to be X. We've said, you decide that, let the free market economics run their course.
So I'm Ben Hansen, small business. Can I apply for these funds right now? Can I apply for a loan? What would the startup process be? What would my first step be?
Yeah, so wonderfund.com, I believe the application is online there. And so any business that's either headquartered in the state or has a significant presence or tie into the state where there's a direct value can apply. That gets it in the pipeline and the queue for the O'Leary Ventures team, and then they work it through their own underwriting and due diligence process from there.
And when you say significant presence, if I'm headquartered in Montana and do 60% of my business there, but I only apply for funds that impact and help me with my 40% business that's in North Dakota, is that okay?
At a high level, I'd say yes. So it has to, we want these dollars invested in North Dakota, spent in North Dakota, the benefit and the value, being realized by North Dakota. We know the nature of this is a lot of times companies are headquartered in Delaware, and that's for strategic reasons. We're not going to throw those out and say, no, you don't, you can't apply when, for all intents and purposes, their operations are here. So it's not really black and white. It's can you paint the case for how this is going to benefit the North Dakota economy or not?
Well, Josh, I really appreciate you coming on and taking questions, and thanks for answering them.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and happy to do it. Thanks for all the great work you guys do as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Kuhl, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
Well, just wrapped up an interview. And listen, as I was saying during the break to Ben, it's not easy defending something that somebody else said. And I appreciate Josh coming on. And I mean, to my point, I think talking about the difference between North Dakota and Minnesota in terms of regulatory regime, tax regime, I think that's fair. I think it's okay for North Dakota to tell that story. Minnesota's got a story to tell too. Minnesota gets a hell of a lot of investment. They're a lot of successful. Their taxes look very different than ours in a lot of different ways. And that's okay. That's up to the people of Minnesota. We're allowed to contrast. We're allowed to compete with them. But I think the one thing is, we're Mr. O'Leary's customer right now, right? Kevin O'Leary is somebody who is working for the state of North Dakota. He's got a contract.
We're hoping for a maximum return.
I think what Josh said about having somebody like him be out there, with his platform telling North Dakota's story, there's absolutely upside in that. But when you insult the neighbors, and by the way, create controversy where there doesn't need to be controversy. I think that's problematic.
I think he's used to creating controversy. It's kind of a ratings thing. It's a reality TV show.
It's a Trump era thing. It's a Trump era thing. Yeah.
Trump era thing, but and you have to antagonize to get people to watch after the commercial break. But I mean, when you're talking about your customer base too, I mean, come on, man. Do a little bit of thinking there. If you own a customer-facing business in Fargo, if I'm a franchisee owner of Jimmy John's, and I'm targeting sales to college students up in North Fargo, do you think I'm going to stop there and not try and post some on East Street to target the students in MSU and Concordia? Duh, of course I am.
Okay, I think
why antagonize businesses that can do businesses across state border? And if you want to play this policy game, that's fine, Kevin. Tell me why there's 20 Fortune 500 companies headquartered out of the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and there are 0, count them, goose egg in North Dakota. Why is that? Is it policy?
Is that true? Is that true?
Yes, it is true.
MDU's Fortune 500, aren't they? They're based in North Dakota.
I didn't think so. I didn't think they were 500. They are based in North Dakota. I didn't think they were Fortune 500. No,
I think they are. No, but I mean that's neither here nor there. I mean your point being
3M, United Healthcare,
there are advantages.
Target.
Minnesota and North Dakota's, and we could point to some historical things that have worked in
Medtronic,
the fact that they have a navigable river running right through Minneapolis, St. Paul helped them historically.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of things.
The shipping route.
We don't need to talk about all that. I'm just saying, and I think to your point about a business, I think it's really like if you're a startup in Fargo, and I'm trying to think of a relevant bit. Let's just say you're a startup in Fargo, and you're going to have customers in Fargo, and you're going to have customers in Moorhead, and you are thinking, boy, maybe I could get some money from the Wonder Fund to invest and help me get off the ground. But are my Moorhead customers going to have a bad taste in their mouth about the Wonder Fund because of what? I mean, why? Maybe not. You would hope not. But why even create that?
And my point when I was comparing the neighborhoods and he literally said Moorhead looks like Cuba. I'm sorry. You can do shot by shot screenshots of West Fargo, and Moorhead.
Cuba's a communist country that has lived under 2 generations of a dictatorship now.
Of right? 2 brothers who throw journalists in jail. I'm sorry. No one in Moorhead is doing that. And Tim Walz is not Fidel Castro. I don't care what your political leanings are. Yeah. It's
just an unfair thing to say. So anyway, I mean, and that.
And also, what's one of the bigger things that Governor Burgum's touting right now? They just got rid of income tax for military members who had had that on the books for decades. Minnesota. So, I mean, there's shades here. There's nuances. There's deeps in policy and whatever. And if you really want to get into it, the ever-present property tax problem, anyone who's in real estate and Fargo Moorhead knows property taxes are inherently less in Moorhead.
Right.
There aren't anywhere near as many specials in Moorhead. If you're a homeowner, them property taxes and them specials, those come right out of your bank account too. Doesn't matter what you call them.
Yeah, and so I mean that's a calculation people could make. I don't think there's anything wrong with drawing these contacts. There's a debate to be had back and forth about it, about Minnesota's policies versus North Dakota policies. You don't have to agree with Mr. Leary. I think calling Moorhead Cuba unhelpful.
And you will pay higher income taxes in the state of Minnesota if you earn a certain dollar amount. Them's just the facts.
And also business taxes as well. And
individualized business taxes. You'll pay less in property taxes as a homeowner depending on your income or whatever.
Right. I mean, we could go down this road. It's anyway.
The legislature's getting hot. They're passing a lot of bills and failing a lot of them. Sorry, what were you saying?
I wanted to talk about Governor Burgum running for president. What do you think about that?
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I broke that story. It's interesting. I knew he was going to run in 2024 for governor. I mean, I full on expected that. And clearly he's going to run. It brings up so many questions. Like, if he's running for president, does he run for governor in 2024?
That's a big bite to did he bite more than he could chew there? Because what do you do there? Do you go and you run in Iowa? So I don't think he would have dipped his toe that far in Iowa just to retract it. I can't imagine. Maybe he thought no one would find out about it, but there's no way he wouldn't know. And the silence from him, I agree with you. The silence from the camp is pretty much confirmation that he's at least going to make a try. Now, the problem I think for him is he's going to get 3%. I mean, he's quintessentially Tim Pawlenty for president. He's going to go to Iowa. He's going to hit that national stage, and everyone's going to go, eh.
Yeah. Except I remember when everybody thought that Donald Trump was going to go nowhere.
He's not the same.
He's not Donald Trump. But what I'm saying is sometimes the candidate can catch fire. There has not, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, there has never been a more chaotic moment in the Republican Party than right now.
There's not, but I think it requires that much more chaos to capture the moment. I don't think anyone the den of jackals right now in the hard wing of the people that show up to caucus right now, none of them are looking for calm. I'm sorry. They're looking for either advanced chaos beyond Donald Trump or someone who's
could be, but to me,
they know what they're looking for.
To me,
no one's going to stop and coalesce under one calm candidate. I mean, Doug Burgum's not going to be the only calm candidate. If Doug Burgum was the only alternative to, like, I guess Trump and DeSantis, maybe he's not going to be. There's going to be 10 of them.
Well, there's already Nikki Haley. There's Chris Christie. Sure sounds like he's going to be in at some point.
Mike Pompeo is going to be in there.
I think Mike Pence is going to be in there. So I part of that's kind of how Donald Trump got the nomination in the first place, is there were so many other not Donald Trump candidates. They all undermined each other until Donald Trump was the winner. So, I mean, there is a danger in that. Listen, I guess that speaking as somebody who is actually affiliates with Republicans, I mean, affiliates in that I've thought of myself as being right of center, conservative. I generally vote for Republican candidates. I want calm in the race, and I understand that might not be what the base is looking for right now. I don't think that's an argument against trying. And the people laughing up their sleeves about Doug Burgum running for president, that he doesn't have a chance and everything else. I mean, yeah, absolutely, he's a long shot. I think if we injected him with truth serum, he'd admit he's a long shot. But I don't know. I mean, in this moment in history, I don't know that you don't try. And also, let's also remember, not everybody who runs for president intends to be elected president. There's a lot of reasons.
Extremely true.
Sometimes they run to sell books. Sometimes they run to try to angle into a cabinet appointment. And maybe that's what he's got his mind on. Maybe he wants to be Secretary of Energy or Secretary of Agriculture or Secretary of the Interior. He's shown a great deal of interest in Native American issues. That might be something that interests him as well.
Or something to do with cybersecurity, something to do with technology, play up the Microsoft background, the revamping of state government. Now, what I could see, too, is him trying to pull, whether intentionally or not, doing what Joe Biden did in 2008, where Joe Biden ran for president. He used a known name. People within the Democratic Party said, "We like you, Joe. It's not your moment. It's either Hillary or Obama." He got out after Iowa and New Hampshire, and then became a very safe pick for vice president. Donald Trump is clearly not going to pick Mike Pence to be his VP. And if DeSantis or someone else comes as a kingslayer and actually knocks him out, they're going to need a VP. And the main, right now, it doesn't look like the top of the ticket's going to come from the Midwest. Maybe getting somebody who can play up the business background and not too long of a political resume would be very appealing. And he could position himself nicely for that.
Some of the things he's got working against him is the fact that he's from North Dakota. And I hate to say it, I mean, we are far off the national campaign trail. We have three. We're not an important swing state. We have 3 electoral votes, and everybody knows which party those are going to go to. So,
though flipping a state now has become less and less important. Joe Biden was from Delaware. That wasn't ever going to flip. That doesn't have many electoral. Donald Trump was from New York, and no one even talked about him trying to flip New York when he was running. Didn't even think of it. It wasn't even a consideration.
No, but I mean, Joe Biden was. That's not always a consideration. Joe Biden was on the Obama ticket to knock some of the harder edges off of Barack Obama's idealism. He was a moderate presence on to reinsure some of the older establishment wing of the party. So I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that go into a VP pick, and I don't know that Doug Burgum would be a good VP pick. I don't know that Doug Burgum would be a good vice president, to be honest with you. I think he likes to be the guy in charge. He's an executive branch guy. Being VP, you don't get to be in charge. That's a tough job.
That's what I've seen as well. And I'm wondering how, if you're angling for a third term, can you go to Iowa, come up with a bad result? Because what's the timeline on that? That's January. That's January of 24, right? Or is it December of 23?
No, it's in 24, but
okay. I know they were flirting with bringing it back even further, but so you're looking at January of 23 and then going to your own state convention 2 months later and saying, "Hey, I actually wanted to run for president and want to leave,"
or even trying to do both at once. I think it's been done.
Frankly, as a compliment to Doug, he's nowhere near as incendiary, and frankly, he's got a lot more depth than Kristi Noem, but she is very clearly going to try and run for something nationally here. If she's going to be the Dakota governor, and they're going to interchangeably say North and South Dakota, like the anchors on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News like to do. And I'm sorry, where's the oxygen? Where do you fit in?
As I've tried to analyze this, one of the things I've run into is what I want to be true about the priorities of Republican voters and what is actually true. And by the way, you could say the same thing about the Democratic base, but we're talking about Republicans because they're the ones with the presidential primary. And right now, it seems like what a significant portion of the base wants is sort of the Fox News bomb thrower. And Doug Burgum is not naturally that person. Now, is he willing to impersonate that person to advance a national campaign? He could be. I think if you look at how he campaigned in 2016 versus how he governed, those are two very different people, right? On the campaign trail, it's very Trumpy. It's good old boys network. It's all this stuff. How he's governed has been much more moderate. And so Doug Burgum might be willing to do that. But, the other thing here, too, if he's really got presidential aspirations, what does it mean for some of these bills that are going to be hitting his desk? Like some of these very culture war bills. Things. How do you run a national campaign in front of this Republican electorate if you're vetoing, say, the pronouns bill that's on his desk right now?
Hey, I would love for
him to veto that bill, by the way.
I would love for him to have the spine to do both. Chew them both off, veto it, and go to the national stage and say, "I've got a path forward."
And explain why that's conservative. Explain why that's conservative. We're not going to have the government regulating pronoun use, you ninnies.
By the way, I don't want the government going in and giving you blood tests if you say the wrong words, which didn't pass, but was a bill that a member of my party put forward as part of the genre of these weird, obsessive, personal bills. I am moving beyond that. I want to be the business, whatever you want to say, whatever other Republican platform points you want to say. I would love to see that. I have not seen that from him yet. And the other point I would make is he might be willing to play that character again to run for president. I don't think he's particularly good at faking it. I think it did okay.
I think in 2016 he caught lightning in a bottle. Trump was on the national ticket.
But we've never seen a Republican primary that hot and that contested before. That was a new thing.
But he also won it in a landslide. Like it was in the end, it wasn't that competitive.
Sure, but no one had done it here before. In Iowa, that's all they do.
Right.
Is everybody and their dog plasters their posters all over the Dairy Queen and a semi truck, and the Fred Thompsons and the Herman Cains and the whatever the world. They get their 1 week spotlight, if that, and then they puff and go into a puff smoke.
I'm not saying that this is likely, but Doug Burgum's path to victory at the national level lies in all of the other candidates having so much baggage. They coalesce around somebody like a Burgum, right? So you think like Donald Trump. I don't need to enumerate Donald Trump's baggage at this point. Mike Pence, Donald Trump's vice president. That brings him a lot of baggage. Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's Secretary of State. Chris Christie was a big Donald Trump supporter before flipping on him. Also, Christie has a problem. Remember his term as governor of New Jersey ended ignominiously, including in a scandal where he was using created traffic jams to try to screw very New Jersey type of corruption. Ron
DeSantis is trying to run as Trump without the baggage, except for he's just sitting. He's not even putting up his left while Trump is bashing him in the face.
Well, he's so afraid. Like he's running against Trump while simultaneously being terrified of being overtly critical of Trump. Which, by the way, I have appreciated for all Chris Christie's flaws. I have appreciated him saying, "Say the man's name. If you're going to criticize him, say the man's name." Right? I absolutely agree with that.
But I think all those candidates, and so far what Doug Burgum has done as governor, wilts on the bright spotlight of that stage when put up next to Donald Trump in front of a Republican electorate in a caucus.
Well, that's the problem. So in my theory about that being his path to victory, about him, having the least amount of baggage, that assumes that the Republican primary voters care about baggage. I mean, there's Donald Trump's support persists despite the fact that he incited a riot, an attack on the United States Capitol, right? He's out there warning, if I get indicted, there's going to be death and what is it, death and destruction or something, or death?
So, I don't know, something
crazy thing he said in Waco. Like he's saying this stuff, and his supporters don't care. So, I mean, that's kind of the problem. Is Doug Burgum's path to victory lays with Republican voters caring about a candidate who is nationally electable, who is moderate, and who is competent and free of scandal. And I just don't know that those are priorities for Republicans right now. I think they're angry and they want somebody to go out there and say horrible things about liberals. That's what they seem to want.
They want own libs. I would love to see, if I were a Republican strategist too, I would love to see someone finally take on Donald Trump the way it was the strongest argument that I've heard no one say so far, which is this election's too important and Joe Biden's too dangerous of a president to let someone who has a proven losing track record in both midterms and in presidential elections to go up again for a third time for us when he's overseen our party collapsing. I'll rebuild the party if you make me the nominee. And no one's tried that out so far. Show a little alpha to the alpha. This whole
I think that's what Chris Christie's going to try to do. I think what I kind of want from Chris Christie, I want him to just run a kamikaze campaign. Like, I don't care about winning. I'm just here to take out Donald Trump. And Chris Christie has the unique skill set to do it. I mean, you want to talk about just being able to be on stage with Donald Trump and throw roundhouses right back at him. I mean, if that's what it's going to take, then I guess sign me up. I don't know that I really want Chris Christie to be president either. I mean, this is a horrible thing. Like we're measuring who can win based on, who's going to be the most entertaining or something at a debate. And that's not what I want. By the way, I think Doug Burgum would make a great president of the United States. Like all other things considered, if by some turn of events he were to get elected, I think he would be a great president. I would vote for Doug Burgum. I think he would be a competent administrator for our country. I think he would surround himself with the right sort of people to advise him. I think he would make a lot of very good decisions. I think he'd be good for our country. But boy, I have a tough time seeing a path to victory for him.
Yeah, and for me, he's a Mitt Romney type. And let me.
You say that like that's a bad thing. I like him.
Hey, let me specify that. Mitt Romney was my favorite Republican nominee for president since George Bush Sr. He's clearly a smart person. He's clearly opened a book and read all the way to the very end. And he has a background, whatever you want to call it, in business. And like Mitt Romney, I see a squishiness and a kind of a shape of water to just meet whatever moment there is there to move on to the next goal, which can be savvy, but I want to know what's the cake under that frosting, and I've never been able to tell. Now, it turns out when Mitt Romney only has one Senate term left and he's very angry at Donald Trump, he's a pretty good U.S. senator. But until then, he was pro-choice and he was pro-life and he was marriage equality and then he wasn't. And then he,
Yeah, that was always the knock on Mitt Romney. I would have liked a little more gumption from him earlier on in his national political career, but
I don't, he would not have been he sure as heck wouldn't have been he would not have been a chaos president. He would not have been openly antagonistic to allies. He wouldn't have been chummy with people who are our sworn enemies, who are leaders of their states. I don't think Doug Burgum would cozy up to leaders of North Korea or Russia either. But I mean, God, the bar is so low for that side of the aisle. For me, it's so sad that that's a plus versus who I currently see in the field.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We
shouldn't ignore the fact that Rob Port wants Doug Burgum to run for selfish reasons. I've never had a presidential candidate on my beat before, right? So I'm a little giddy. Like this is this is a professional first for me. So anyway,
you get to tell the story, and
that's a terrible reason for to want somebody to run for president. But
hey, we can root for our hometown teams too. Not every presidential candidate has to come from New York, California, or Texas.
It's time for a president from North Dakota. Why not?
It's time for let's have a couple presidents from three electoral state votes. We'll have somebody from North Dakota, somebody from Vermont.
Which state is it that's had the most?
I think it's Massachusetts.
Is it Massachusetts?
Or is it New York?
I thought it was like Ohio.
No, not even close.
You don't think so?
Who
Taft?
Would that be?
Taft was Ohio.
Yeah.
Taft is Ohio, and I think was it Ulysses Grant, Ohio?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But I mean, you got.
I'm gonna Google it.
You got let's see, we've got. Well, it might be presidential candidates, but you have both the Roosevelts from New York. You've got who's the other immediate New Yorker that came to mind? Oh, weren't there probably a lot of actually just by
more? No, I'm right. I am absolutely right. More presidents have come from Ohio than any other state. William Henry Harrison, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Benjamin Harrison, William McKinley, William Taft, and Warren Harding.
Well, that was a whole bunch of
presidents.
Post-founding fathers, pre-Civil War boring presidents. Those are the boring ones. Then after the Civil War,
you're telling me William Taft he launched 80 antitrust suits against some of the nation's largest corporations. He also was the first president to throw out the ceremonial first pitch at a baseball game, Ben. Don't tell me William Howard Taft is boring, sir.
William Taft was an excellent president and a bit of a boring one. Yeah. Up until Woodrow Wilson.
I would vote for boring. Wasn't that what we were just saying? I would vote for boring right now.
Sure. All right.
I want boring. Okay. Yeah. Give me another boring ass president from Ohio.
That's the summary. Rob Port wants Doug Burgum to run for president on a Taft-like platform. That actually is. You actually kind of want him to run on a Taft-like platform.
I do kind of. Just be boring. Just be boring. Just let Americans live their lives. Let us do business. Let us live our lives. Fight the bad guys nationally or resist I don't want to go to war, but resist the bad guys nationally.
Do you know who's a pretty boring president who's shown some resistance but not gone to war against our enemies?
Okay, Joe Biden. Yeah. I mean, listen, I have a lot of problems with Joe Biden. I'll tell you, I prefer it to what Donald Trump did to this country, which I know some of my conservative listeners are going to listen to that and say, "We knew it. You're a Democrat, Port." There's a lot of policies I don't like Joe Biden on, but we have just lowered the bar.
I would never accuse you of being a Democrat, though I'm also not the
you're not the authority on what's not.
Hey, we're running long, but next time we got to jump into a whole lot of things are happening with a whole lot of
Do you want to talk about school lunch real quick before we go?
Yeah, boo hiss to the Senate for reconsidering a bill and losing it by one vote. A very very
well. The reconsideration wasn't by one vote. The original bill lost by one vote. The reconsideration, I think, was 4 or 5 votes.
Shouldn't have lost by one vote. It's absolutely ridiculous. It was a small move of the needle to cover school lunches in a way that would have helped working class families, as you correctly pointed out, and in the grand scheme of the overall state budget, was not something that was going to sign us up for a forever bill, fund, drag us, increase our tax rates. You are buying this food in bulk. We're talking about children. They are not working jobs. It is mandatory for them to be there. And you're doing silly things like requiring them to pay off a school lunch debt in order to receive a high school diploma that they've earned, that they're trying to then use to get a higher paying job to make themselves rid themselves of less debt. What a regressive viewpoint. It is absolute.
It frustrated me. All the people,
personal responsibility.
All the people out there who are saying, well, we're just going to bail out. We already pay for school lunch for the poor people. We're going to, even that bill, even pared down as it was, would have paid for school lunches for people making up to 200% of the poverty level. That's just $60,000 for a household of 4, right? So that's a mom and a dad. If they make the same, they're each making $30,000 a year plus 2 kids. They're not rich. That is not a rich household.
You have one bad car. I don't know. Are there a family of 4 out there that might have a bad car breakdown, a big dental bill, and an insulin bill all in the same year? Yes, there are. And I'm so sorry that we're trying to help. I mean, these are literally working class, emphasis on working. This isn't a handout. You're trying to help people stay financially stable, to move into the middle class and be prosperous.
The school lunch fee, the school lunch fee is a tax. It's a tax on, because you have to send your kids to school and they have to eat lunch. Now, I guess you can make lunch at home every day. I guess you could do that, but that still has a cost. And I challenge you to make your kid a lunch that's as filling and nutritious as what they're getting at school for less than what you're paying the school. So if you make,
again, you're buying in bulk. It's absolutely
you're just not going to do it. So the thing is this is a tax on families, and yeah, some of them are rich families, some of them aren't. I just don't. I mean, to me, I looked at it that way. I pay more for school lunches for my 2 kids in school than I pay in personal income taxes. You want to put some more money back in my pocket? Mm-hmm. Pick up the tab for school lunches. I don't.
And by the way, the governor has said that he wanted lunches to be covered for students at the beginning of session. I would love to see him use his political sway to come. I don't know. I wish he would have been. I don't understand. He doesn't have a magic wand. I understand he's not a wizard, but use your political influence. Try and get your own caucus that has a 3/4 majority in the Senate to vote your way.
We were clearly. I mean, we were close. We were close. I mean, let's not lay it. There's a heck of a lot of Republicans in both chambers who voted for this.
There were a heck of a lot of Republicans,
not enough,
but they're one short, and close only counts in horseshoes.
Right. There's only 4 Democrats in the Senate, so that means what got them 1 vote shy was mostly Republicans. It was so close. You peel just a couple of votes in the Senate. At the very least, we're paying up to 200% of poverty level.
Do you know why Judy Lee voted against it and then voted for the reconsider?
I don't.
I'm an actual question.
I don't know. I have not spoken to her. I don't know what her thinking was. Part of me thought maybe she was thinking that she would position herself to be able to call it back for reconsideration, but then, I mean, by doing that, you cost the bill for passing the first time.
So, play with that fire.
So I don't know. I don't know why.
And she's a smart player too. She wouldn't have done that if she didn't have a reason. She knows how to play chess there. So
and it surprised me because I would have expected her to be. I mean, if it's her true position, I would have thought she would have voted for the original bill, right? Like I would expect her to support it, but. So I don't know. That's a question for her. I don't have any insight on that. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. We're over a little long. Ben, I'm so glad to have you back, man. We have great conversations. Really appreciate it. All right.
Let's jump in. Next time. Well, we can soft line too. We got a whole lot more shows to go over the course of the session.
We absolutely do. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.